Good day, I'm Vincent Saxtetter, and this is the After the Age of Fire channel. This is episode 37, recorded March 21st, 2026. This episode is Our Civilization's Feet of Clay Analysis. Analysis is a particular way of reasoning, and I'm saying we over-rely on it, and it can really stop us in our tracks. This is a prepping channel, prepping for you and your family line so that you can flourish, thrive, and reproduce in the coming era that's starting around now. We're finishing an era of continuous doubling of our consumption of just about every resource, about doubling worldwide our consumption of anything roughly every 22 years, so every generation could expect to have twice as much as the previous. This is averaged over the world's population. Some had more money and were growing better than others, but the average across the world was a doubling every 22 years from one generation to the next, and this is coming to an end right now. And we've gone through a very long process, around 15 or 20 episodes, looking at how much energy we'll have long term, and it'll be a little less than we have now. Right now we have around 46,000 calories per person per day. This is averaged across the whole world, but 46,000 calories of fuel and energy from renewables, and another 15,000 calories of food, fodder, and wood, so it adds up to around 60,000. And in the coming era, it'll be more like 30,000, because we can't sustain we've looked at all the ways we could sustain or try to sustain 46,000 plus 15,000, and we just don't have what it takes to build enough renewables and endure the side effects. And coal, oil, and gas will either require a lot more effort or give us less. And then we looked also at food, fodder, and wood in depth, and they also can't make the difference, that they can't fill the hole that will occur in our energy usage when we get less and less coal, oil, and gas. So this is what we're prepping for. It's for a new era, an era that people in this current generation are just not used to. We've been used to continuous growth and a glut of energy, basically, and that's not going to be the case in the coming era. And so how do you thrive and flourish, and how do you help ensure that your family does reproduce and is prosperous in the coming era? So now we're winding up the first section of this channel's content. This is episode 37. And 38, the next episode will be the last in this first section of the content. We have discussed our multiplication pattern, our consumption. We've looked at the limits on our supply of energy and where those limits come from. So episodes 22 through 31 were about our energy from food, fodder, and wood, and whether we could get more and what it would take. Episodes 16 to 20 and then 32 to 35 were on our energy from renewables and nuclear, and why we'll never get more than 15,000 calories or so from renewables and nuclear. That's 15,000 calories per person per day. And then episodes 14 and 15 were on coal, oil, and gas. You can go back and look at those if you want to hear about the end of oil or the end of coal, oil, and gas. Not exactly an end, we'll still have some, but it'll be less than we have now. So in the next episode, we'll summarize all this discussion that's gone on for 37, 38 episodes so far. And then we'll be on to the next section, which is about where we are now. And then the third section will be the future and how to prepare for it. So then we'll finally, you may already have some ideas, some inklings if you've been listening this far, about things you might do to prepare, but then we'll really get into it. This episode, this is about seeing what we're good at as as a civilization and what we're hopeless at. And I mean modern civilization, I mean something that started roughly around the time of the scientific revolution, and all the technology and engineering that we've developed, and also certain things that are a lot like technologies for managing society and government and people. Things like the modern education, or liberal democracy, or freedom of speech, that we've, or all the business practices about how to operate a business either locally or globally. All of these are things that have developed starting with the scientific revolution, and that produce so many of the experiences and comforts that we have of modern life. So, and what I'm saying is that this whole ball of wax is based on a particular way of reasoning called analysis, and analysis is a very important part of reasoning. But around the time of the scientific revolution, around 500 years ago, we began to let it guide everything that we do. It became the foundation and methodology of science, but then progressively of all other human activities. So what is analysis? Analysis means breaking something apart intellectually or really. So either you understand what its components are, or you actually break it apart and look at each component one by one, manage each component one by one. So you figure out, it may also involve a step of understanding what the components are. So figuring out, okay, well, instead of just slicing straight through a human body, I should try to separate if I want to know what the components are, I should separate the organs from each other. There are natural boundaries between those organs, and then think about those individually. That would be analysis. It's a very, very old and fundamental component of human reasoning. I suspect we've been doing analysis as a human race, taking things apart, looking at them, understanding things in terms of their parts, since we began to talk, to think, to reason. The word, to give you an idea of how deep it is in our roots, the word analysis itself is rooted in the Proto-Indo-European language. That's the language that's the ancestor of almost all of the European languages. So it's several thousand. It's way before Latin and Greek. It's many thousands of years ago, and maybe at that time it would have sounded something like loi or lu, and it would have meant something about breaking apart or unfastening something from something else. But it has been such an important part of our reasoning that it's continued into even the modern English. So I think analysis is fundamental. You have to use it. It's very basic human reasoning. But the problem is when you let analysis take over, when you let it set our agenda and be our guiding light, our methodology, and be the only tool in our intellectual toolbox. Okay, when it excludes other forms of reasoning, then you have a problem. Okay, so in particular, one sort of reasoning that it can exclude is synthesis. Okay, which synthesis is kind of the opposite of analysis. It's putting things back together so that all the pieces help each other, and so that the whole is greater than the parts. So it's a difference between having a house and a home. Somehow somebody lives in a house and begins to arrange things and to adjust things until it works as a home, one hopes. Some people are better homemakers than others, or it's the ability to see a forest instead of the trees. That's synthesis also, or the ability to take grunts and vocalizations, and then turn them into words, and then turn those into sentences, and then into stories. That's synthesis. Okay, it's being able to communicate, not just grunt. Choirs exemplify synthesis. They work together. Communities also, a good, thoughtful, respectful, loving community is an exercise in synthesis of many people synthesizing together. And then we have the pinnacle of synthesis, at least among the human race, is the great art like the Sistine Chapel or Bach's music or cathedrals. So those are exercises in making every single thing do triple or quadruple duty, and making it all fit together perfectly in inventive and amazing ways. And no human, no matter how disabled, how handicapped, is missing the ability to synthesize in some respect. It doesn't matter whether you're quadriplegic or what. Somehow your presence in the room adds to the room, and can bond other people together even without speaking a word, even without waking up. Other people can, or a baby straight from the womb brings things out of people and brings people together in ways that would be would just amaze you ahead of time, and people begin. It's just a fundamentally human ability. I can see perhaps how a human might be, a severely handicapped person might be in some sense missing the ability to analyze, to take things apart, to see what the components are. But I'm sure that every human being, no matter who they are, even if they're not conscious, it somehow enables something greater in the community around them than if they weren't there. So the problem for us right now is that the scientific revolution exalted analysis until it became our dominant way of understanding. In the scientific revolution, we began taking nature apart to figure out how it ticked. And we were so successful with that we started to apply that to everything else that we did. So we began to adopt a scientific way of understanding society and education and people and food, you name it, it's been analyzed by now. I'll go over some of the things that we've done at the end of this episode, but just part of the analysis is analyzing society into different roles, into responsibilities. People have different tasks. We have specialists. We have a division of labor. We have products, product lines, and we also divide our knowledge into different categories. So you have different academic subjects, and within those subjects you have specialties. It's all been laid out, categorized, and divided, and it's been tremendously successful at helping us understand many things and helping us develop very complex groups of people, specialists in different things, companies, governments, churches, whatever, working together to get something done. But the problem is that whenever we confront a problem, by now, we always play the same card. We never play with a full deck. Always our solution is to look at the pieces of the problem or the pieces of the problematic thing, or if we have a challenge, figuring out how we could analyze that challenge in terms of different aspects of it, and then attack each of those parts one by one. So by now we have a great example of analysis in this in this channel, when we discussed how plants work and how we could get a better harvest from them, we just continuously relied on analysis to understand plants and their harvest. So we broke photosynthesis into steps, and we looked at all the. So if photosynthesis has steps, then we identify those. That's an exercise in analysis, and we also look at the components inside the plants that perform those steps in photosynthesis, which is another step in analysis. And we highlighted some and left some in the background, but by now we've discussed dozens of them inside of plants, and if you go to a plant physiology textbook, you'll find hundreds and thousands of different molecules and organs and so on inside of plants. The list never stops, and it continually is added to. That's analysis. And I'm not questioning whether, certainly there are these parts and you need to know what they are, but when we rely only on that, we run into problems. We also, when we looked at the energy loss, we broke down the energy loss into 3 stages. One was the stage where you lose energy just by living in land in a climate that's not ideal, and then there was another stage where it's the difference between living in a scientific lab and living in the outdoors, of dealing with life and death for plants, and with all the adjustments that a plant has to make to live in a particular outdoor location. And then there was a third level, a third stage of energy loss inside the plant, and even then we went and looked inside the plant and found more stages inside that of energy loss within the plant. So it was an exercise in analysis. It helped us understand better why plants don't get all the energy from all the sunlight they receive. It revealed marvelous things inside of plants, things that you would never suspect from the naked eye, are inside whole worlds of amazing organs and proteins and things working together in marvelous ways. But there was a fly in the ointment, and the fly in the ointment was that when we began to look at efforts to improve photosynthesis, to improve the plant harvest, and we examined the scientific ideas of modern scientists of what you could do to improve the harvest. There were many ideas, but all stumbled and most failed. They all came up short. So in the end, we were talking about, for some plants and some possible improvements to their DNA, under certain circumstances, you might get tens of 10, 20, 30% improvement in the harvest. And that was it. And most of the proposed improvements just don't work, or in most cases are not applicable. So we had a great understanding of where the energy, we had analyzed where the energy is lost. We analyzed how the plant worked. We learned a lot about genes and molecules, but it didn't give us the ability to improve the plants much at all, or even to predict what change in the DNA would do what. That's a big problem. Is you can propose all sorts of changes to DNA, and now we have the technology to make them very quickly. We propose a change, and a week or 2 weeks later, some guy in a lab can make that change, but we have very next to no ability to predict what the overall effect of that change will be on the plant. In fact, most of them end in the plant being stunted or die. So the problem is that we can't predict all the side effects of a genetic change. We're aiming at one particular improvement, and we get that improvement perhaps, but we get an awful lot of side effects, which are usually so awful that the plant is crippled or dead. These are objective facts about plants and about our ability to improve them. We cannot improve them much at all, and we cannot predict the side effects of the changes that we do make. We've got a great view of the individual parts of the plant and of the process that they use to harvest energy, but somehow the plant itself and its harvest and the biosphere as a whole have slipped from our grasp. We're blinded. Somehow the technique that we used, analysis, breaking the plant and its harvest into pieces, has blinded us to the plant so badly that we don't have a good feel for the plant as a whole, and we don't have a way to improve it substantially or to predict side effects of any particular thing that we might do. We know an awful lot of the plant, and somehow at the same time we know nothing. So that's analysis for you. It can give you a lot of results and a spectacular success, and still at the end of the day it may not give you at all what you wanted. You can't see the forest for the trees. It blinds you somehow to the thing you're dealing with. You get so busy looking at the details and the components and somehow you fail to grasp the whole. So I thought that this was the right time to bring up analysis, because we have a great case study in analysis and how it succeeds and how it fails. And it'll be good preparation for what's coming up in the next section of this channel about where we are now. Okay, there are 3 consequences of over-relying on analysis that I want to discuss. One is a failure to invent. Well, you can invent anything you like, but to make something competitive with what's already there. Make something of your own that can perform with the same functionality and overall as well as something else. And analysis somehow can't guide you to that. Another one is failure to improve something. We've seen that with plants. And a third one is failure to scale up. You can scale up to a certain point, but beyond a certain point you try to do something even grander, even bigger, even more world-embracing, and you just fail. So I'll go over these in order. First, failure to invent. So the point is that when we use analysis to inform us about how to build something new, which is how we generally do everything today, whenever we try to invent something new or just to make a better chair or something, we use analysis. We try to figure out which things need to be done, and what are the particular functions that this thing is supposed to do, and then we make different parts to fulfill the different functions. And in general, each part of the thing we're designing has one job, one and only one job. So if you take anything in your house or your car or whatever, and you were to open it up and start examining it, then you could immediately say, what is this piece for? What is this piece for? What is this piece for? And the answer will almost always be a single answer. This piece is the transmission of the car that transmits motive power from the engine toward the wheels, right? This part is a wheel. This part is a windshield, and that's what a windshield for. It's for keeping bugs out of your eyes. In general, everything we make is that way. You look at a piece and you know that piece has a purpose, one purpose. And the result of this is that we're aiming. We get a device that's good. Analysis is great at giving us a device that's very good at a single thing, like going real fast. Okay, but not much good at anything else. We optimize our device for a single purpose at the expense of all else. So I want to give an example of solar panels, and keep in your mind that I'm thinking of the comparison between solar panels and plants. Okay, so how's a solar panel built? Well, you start with thinly cut silicon wafers. They're just sheets of silicon. Okay, and you make a sandwich out of the silicon and other things. So first of all, the silicon itself has several layers. On the top of the silicon, you put some additional phosphorus, and that additional phosphorus means that when light shines on that top layer of the silicon, so now the silicon itself, even though it's very thin, has layers. The top layer has the phosphorus in it, and that phosphorus means that when light shines on the silicon, that phosphorus layer likes to push electrons out of the silicon. On the bottom, you put boron, and so you have a layer of boron on the bottom, phosphorus on top, and maybe more layers in the middle. But the boron on the bottom is there so that the bottom layer likes to receive electrons. So you have something set up so that the sandwich has a layer on top that likes to make electrons go away from the silicon through a wire to get something done, and then a layer on the bottom that likes to receive electrons later once the electrons are done doing their work and want to come back home. So already you have at least the top layer and the bottom layer and whatever is in between, and then you may add more layers to improve the solar cell's behavior. And then on top of that, you put metal contacts on the top and on the bottom so that connects the solar cell to your wires. And then on top of all that, you put layers of coating and of plastic and glass to protect the solar cell, to help it capture more light, and so on. And by the time you're done, you may have 15 or 20 layers in your solar cell. So you've thought of all the things the solar cell needs to do. It needs to endure, so you put a strong layer on it. It needs to accept as much light as possible, so you put layers of plastic and glass on that. You have a boron and a phosphorus layer. You have more layers inside if you like. You think of all the things that you need the solar cell to do, and for each of those things to do, you make another layer. So this is why you have a sandwich. You have analyzed the problem, and the result of your analysis was a list of things to do, and so you made a sandwich with different layers that do the different things. So what's the result of this analytic procedure of designing a solar cell? Well, the result is that if you're looking at a narrow time frame, namely from the solar cell's construction until its failure, and a single task, which is generating electricity, the solar cells outperform plants. They're better at capturing light than plants doing photosynthesis. So a solar cell will get 20% of the light. An economical solar cell will, standard price. And a plant will, well, if it's in a lab, it can get up to 5%. So it outperforms by a factor of 4 during that time frame. Okay? But in every other respect, the solar cell is unspeakably inferior to a plant. Solar cells do not produce themselves, they do not maintain themselves, they do not help the land when they die or while they're living, they do not clean up, they are generally toxic, they're more expensive, and they produce a product, electricity, which is much harder for us to use. We go to great lengths to build the batteries and the wires and the motors that use electricity, whereas plant material, all you have to do is put it in your mouth or burn it. So they're just unspeakably worse at everything than plants, except for one thing, which is getting more energy from the sunlight. The difference is like the difference between Bach, the music of Bach, and a jackhammer. That's how this particular invention, after 50 plus years of scientific development, hundreds of billions of dollars, and scaling up to, that's where we are compared to a plant. You know, and you look at you can describe a solar cell's composition in these layers, right? And it wouldn't take you that long to list all the layers if you were methodical. You could write them, even if it's 20 layers, you could say what they are. Describing how to build them is another matter, okay? But as we know from looking at plants, plants are just amazingly sophisticated, from everything from the proteins up to the organs to the plant cells to the sophistication of design, if you want to call it design, of a plant is just again, the comparison between that and a solar cell's design is like the difference between a Bach and a jackhammer. So that's failure to invent. Okay, you invent something that's superior at one particular thing and unspeakably worse at everything else. We can repeat this for anything that we try to design that's meant to replicate the function of something that already exists. For instance, joints or brains or any other organ. But I'll just pick on birds versus airplanes. I do love airplanes. I've spent a lot of time flying on airplanes and enjoy it. They're fascinating, amazing things, but they just can't compare to a bird. Here, an airplane, the reason why it flies is because it exercises brute force. It has a prolonged explosion, or, you know, practically speaking, if it's if it's jet fuel, if it's a jet engine, then it really is an explosion. If it's instead a propeller plane, then that has tiny little explosions inside of the engine over and over again. But it's flying because of explosions and because it's just forcing itself through the air. Okay, and during 12 hours of flight, a plane may burn around a half of its takeoff weight. So that's why we don't have plane flights that, at least not without refueling, that last more than around 12 hours, because you just go through so much fuel along the way. In contrast, a bird may burns its body fat, which has about the same calorie density as jet fuel, much more slowly, and birds can keep going. They keep going a lot longer before they need to eat anything. Planes need careful checks every few weeks at least, and actually there's some level of checking after each flight. Birds don't. They don't need a tune-up or a check. Birds can turn on a dime, and they do amazing maneuvers. You would, if you were to think about what you're looking at, you'd be on the edge of your seat. Planes can't begin to do the kinds of really detailed, fascinating maneuvers that a bird can. Planes do not steer themselves. Birds do steer themselves. Planes love to crash. You have to keep very vigilant attention to your plane while you're in it. The pilot, you know, from an extremely well-trained person, or better, several people, keeping very, very careful watch over the plane, or within a minute or two it'll probably be in the ground. And birds basically never crash. You know, and again, an airplane doesn't have any of a body's sophistication, looking from the proteins on up. It's in summary, an airplane compared to a bird is just a flying rock. That's it. I mean, I agree. They're marvels of human technology. They're wonderful. I love them. But compared to a bird, they just don't begin to compare. So that's failure to invent. And it applies to everything that we make to replicate, to achieve some function. Our joints, for instance. A second consequence of over-relying on analysis, we just talked about the first one. The second one is failure to remedy or improve. Okay, and we already saw this with plants. We went through that in detail, and found it was very difficult to make even small improvements. We can also talk about traffic accidents, where we've thought of dozens and dozens of things, that probably hundreds of things that you can do to prevent traffic accidents, and we've tried them all, and we continue to try them all, but the overall effect is not a huge effect. It's not. We're still having lots of traffic accidents. We have no chance of, dividing. I don't know. Maybe we still could divide them by 2, but not by 100. Nothing we do, they're just a problem that won't go away. And there's something similar going on with health, how we care for people, their health. We identify their symptoms, then we identify diseases, so that's another step of analysis. The first one is figuring out which of many symptoms they might be having. So you divide one symptom from another, you have this classification scheme, then you see how this person with their symptoms fits into a list of diseases, which is another exercise in analysis, and then you think about what to do about it, surgery, and so many kinds of surgery, or therapy, or medication, okay, and thousands of medications. Again, this is an exercise in analysis. And then, so it may work well one time or twice, you have a pneumonia and you take an antibiotic, okay, and the pneumonia goes away, okay. But the problem is that we keep on adding treatments and prescriptions and so on, and people can over their lifetime easily end up at 20 medications per day, and after you add one medication after another, you begin to wonder whether a particular symptom or problem that the patient is experiencing is a side effect of something you've done already, or whether a particular medication is hurting, or whether after arriving at 20 medications, whether you really need even maybe 2 or 3 would at this point be doing just as well. But you'll never know, because if you take one out of the mix, you'll be risking the possibility that they could die any second now. So you have 20. By the time you have 20, you can be sure that at least 1 or 2 of them is hurting the patient, but you don't know which one. So, and overall, once you've gotten to that point, you have to wonder whether the medications have actually, in total, by now, improved the patient's life, or whether the patient would be better off without them. There's so many side effects. So that was a second consequence of over-relying on analysis. And the third one is failure to scale up. Okay, so we love specialization, we love division of labor, okay, but it works better for small businesses than for large businesses. Everyone knows that a bureaucracy or a large business is slower on its feet and less fun to work in, and does a poorer job for the clients than a small one does. And one particular problem is that when you have something where you have many specialties and many job descriptions and so on, it's hard to get people to work together. This happens in universities, for instance, where you have specialists from many different academic fields, and when you have a problem that seems like it might need somebody from more than one specialty, getting the right people in the right room and getting them to actually talk to each other in each other's language and really fully cooperate may just you may never get there. Same thing with healthcare. If you need if somebody's having a particular health problem or they need a particular kind of surgery, they might not just need the surgeon, they may need all sorts of other people involved, each of these very highly trained doctors. And if you need 4 or 5 of these doctors in a room, each of them individually extremely expensive, and then getting them to make time to all be in the same room talking to each other, solving a problem, is generally just not possible. So there are problems, no matter whatever kind of analysis you do, you always come to a point where you wish you could combine things that you had already divided, and it's usually impossible. So for bureaucracies, it can happen that and it does happen all the time, that as a bureaucracy or a large company or a government grows, it begins making its own decisions in one way or another. What's called the swamp. Or I already talked about that when I mentioned organizational failure, where a bureaucracy may even be under the illusion that it's continuing to put safety first, safety of a rocket, for instance, or of a nuclear reactor, and in fact it's following other priorities without anybody quite meaning to. It's on its own trajectory. Governments generate things like stamping systems or paper chases, where when a lowly citizen or a company needs to get something done, they have to go through step after step after step, getting certified by one branch of the bureaucracy after another, and which serves no one, but it just happens. Or if you have a child who's of particular concern, and you're trying to ensure that this child is receiving proper care from all parties, and that the government is stepping up for the child to make sure the child is not abused or whatever, then you may have meetings once every 2 months involving a caseworker, a social service caseworker, and a teacher, and a counselor, and a nurse, and a parole officer, and a policeman. And they don't have time to think about that child every day, but every 2 months you put these 7 or 8 people in a room, and they go through some checklist, and then they're done for the day, and you just have to know the child isn't getting the care that they really need. There's a bunch of specialists that have only time once every 2 months, and nobody knows the child really. The same thing happens in software, which is one of my specialties. It's relatively easy for a single person to write a piece of software by themselves, but the more people you add to a project, the less you get done. So you may think that you can do. This is why our operating systems get as little. The things that run our computers and all the software that we use has the limits that it has, is because it doesn't matter whether you employ 100 or 10,000 or 100,000 people to develop and improve that software. In the end, you get roughly the same result. So what we have here, when I talk about failure to scale up, is something that was already discussed long ago in the Bible. It's the Tower of Babel story, where you have people that possess the technology for making something very nice, very successful, but as they try to scale it up, as they try to build that tower higher and higher, at some point they just are unable to communicate with each other. There are too many specialties, too many workers, and the whole project falls apart. So here I think we may have already solved all the problems. Our civilization has been trying to use analysis on every single problem we can think of, and we may have already solved all the problems that analysis can solve. And I think we may have, and I think we have gone beyond that, to quote solve, unquote, many problems where analysis gives little or no benefit. And we're trying very hard to solve every problem we have with the same playing card. We're playing with a one-card playing deck. So, and moreover, we're trying to scale everything we do up. We're trying to find the perfect system that will ensure our continued success and prosperity. So every idea that we have, we try to scale up to a global basis, a global scale, and we can expect this to collapse. Okay, sooner or later, we'll just find that our methodology doesn't give us what it takes to go global. So I want to talk a little bit about analysis. I said that analysis is the centerpiece of our civilization. Now I want to back it up with some examples. First of all, and then finally, I'll come to a conclusion of this episode. So we're close to the conclusion, but I just want to talk about some examples of how we use analysis everywhere. So I'm a physicist. Physics is among the oldest of the sciences, along with astronomy, and perhaps math isn't a science, but I'd say that those are probably the primordial sciences, physics, and astronomy, and then along with that, math. But very quickly, some of the other sciences were being invented, like chemistry. But the methodology of physics and what is to isolate interesting bits of nature for experiment. You take that bit and you put it in your experiment. You look at that little bit by itself, and usually it's a bit that you have prepared yourself. You've purified the material, and you've gotten to extreme lengths to understand every detail of the material, so that if something occurs inside that setup, the experiment that seems a little bit awry and that isn't quite to your expectations, you'll know it can't be the 1,000 things that you've already controlled and purified and so on, and it allows you to sort out the one fly in the ointment, hopefully. So we take our bit of nature, we melt it, we fabricate it, and we put it apart, and we isolate it, and then that's analysis. We also have another kind of experiment where it's called destructive experiments, where you take something and you smash it, and you look at what pieces come out. And some of the world's biggest and most famous experiments are of this type. There's things called colliders, like the biggest one right now is the Large Hadron Collider in Switzerland and France. It's an enormous experiment, and it's just for analyzing what happens when you take one particle and smash it against another, and see what the pieces are. We do all sorts of analysis. Another one is approximation, where we say this is the part that's really the important part, or the aspect of this thing that's the important aspect of it. Like, for instance, a bell, and we say, well, I don't want to think about all the details of the bell. I just want to think about the fact that it can ring, and then analyze its ringing. So you've analyzed away everything else about the bell except for that it can ring. That's approximation. So, and we like to divide the world into little bits, particles. That's physics, and it's a sort of a mother of the other sciences. In biology, we classify things into species and genus and family. We also look at the genes of an organism and figure out which gene does what, and you can go on and on with that. In medicine, we look at organs, symptoms, diseases, treatments. This is also true for psychiatry and psychology. We have a Dewey Decimal System, which is practically speaking an organization of all knowledge, so that you can sort out a library and say this particular book belongs on this shelf because it's about this particular kind of thing. We separate our professors and our studies into different subjects and skills, and within each subject there are millions of specialties. For instance, in physics there's an overall division between the experimental physicists and the theoretical physicists, and now maybe you would add a third one, which is the computational physicists. And then within those you'll have all sorts of specialties. And then we also, getting into society, we also analyze society. For instance, we look at people with disabilities, and we may isolate them from other people or from groups. We may keep them out of school, for instance, and at times we also kill the disabled. And nowadays, very commonly, we abort. Millions and millions of people aborted because of their disabilities. We can do the same thing with the aged and the sick, separate them and perhaps kill them. That's a kind of analysis. You break them off from the rest. We think our way of thinking about society, class analysis, capital versus labor, oppressed versus oppressor, race, different races, religions, these are all analysis. We make lists of human rights. We have 3 branches of government, and within those branches many agencies. We have separation of church and state. We have separation of government and business. We have separation of youth versus people working versus retirement. And then we're at the end stage of a sort of an analytic approach to our social fabric. We have, and it's progressive. We have separated the generations from each other, so they don't live in the same house, and they don't know each other. The children and the teenagers and the adults, and then the middle-aged, and then the old people. And then after that, we have destroyed the extended family so that people don't know their third cousin once removed anymore. I've never seen them, wouldn't know one if you saw one. I wouldn't. And then we've gone on from that to the nuclear family. So the nuclear family, perhaps sometimes, a few times a year, seeing your grandparents or your aunts and uncles. Within the nuclear family, we separate things. So we take the childbirth out of the home, and it's in a maternity ward. People are not allowed to see it, not allowed to be there, except of course the mother, and maybe the mother's put to sleep. Perhaps the father is there. Then after that, there's a nursery stage where the child is kept in childcare. Then there's school. Then there's work. Then there's retirement, and then there's a retirement home. All of these are ways of removing people from the home, and breaking up the nuclear family. So, and now we have lots of divorces, and the nuclear family seems to no longer be, certainly is no longer healthy. And then lastly, we're working on breaking up all the human relationships. So there's the song "I Did It My Way," which means, practically speaking, an end to relationships of any duration. Or there's "I Found the Greatest Love of All," meaning loving myself. We talk about healthy boundaries. I think healthy boundaries can be a good thing, but often it's used as a way of just saying of just ending all communication, and saying you're a toxic person, or saying this relationship is toxic. Once I claim that you're a toxic person, or that this relation is toxic, it justifies anything that I want to do. So practically, we've moved from separating generations, separating cultures into generations, then separating the extended family, separating the nuclear family, and then we're analyzing our relationships into oblivion. So these are all things that all of this analysis, all of these analytical constructs have helped us in many ways. But when you rely on them exclusively and you don't see their limits, then you run into problems. So, what I'm saying is that our society, you look at any aspect of our society, of our way of living today, and you'll find at the core of it is an analytic way of understanding and of acting. You'll find that analysis guided the construction of your house, and it is how your clothes are made, and who you connect with, who you're grouped with, the structure of your church, and so on. Okay, so I want to conclude. So I just, after going through our analysis, our attempt to understand plants and how to improve their harvest, we learned what how much we could improve their harvest, perhaps a doubling in the next 100 to 200 years with enormous effort. But then there were two apples ripe for the picking from this process. One was that we could learn about how the biosphere and ourselves are tuned and draw some conclusions about that. In particular, we could conclude, now that we know what tuning is, we could know that we can understand the fundamental reason why renewables will never give us that much energy. But we also had another lesson, which is this episode, which is that this society, this civilization, world civilization, is based on analysis, and therefore it has certain limits. So the next episode, episode 38, will summarize and finish this first section on exponential growth and on how much energy we will have long term. I'll sum it up and I'll say how much energy we're going to have. The next section after that will be about where we are now, how things are going with the end of our exponential growth, the end of our doubling. So are we still doubling? Has the growth not ended yet? Or perhaps the doubling is ending right now, and so maybe the end has begun. And the end of doubling will not occur overnight. It'll take decades, okay? Like everything the human race does. Or is the end already finished? So is there no real growth now and it just looks like perhaps we're still growing? So where are we in this process? Is our growth ended, or when will it end? And then when it does end, what will that look like? It won't be like one day the lights are on and the next day the lights are off. We know that we'll still have energy, some energy after the growth is finished, but what will it look like? How do we know? And what will be the symptoms as it goes? So we'll be examining not just our energy use, but also all aspects of our civilization. I'll be talking over all the things that go in, at least many of the things that we can think about in terms of growth of the civilization and of our well-being. Okay. This present episode, which we're ending right now, will help us to understand how our civilization could fail to do certain things. 3 things. 1, it could fail. Now I hope we understand that we understand how our civilization could fail to invent things that we want or need, like how it could happen that we would fail to invent or produce a successful fusion reactor if it's just taking analysis too far, or how we could fail to invent a new antibiotic. In fact, it's been about 50 years, a dry spell since we had a spurt of inventing good antibiotics for 30 or 40 years, and now it's a 50-year dry spell of basic failure overall. And meanwhile, all the organisms, that would like to take over our bodies are learning how to live with antibiotics, and so the ones we already invented are no longer so foolproof. Or how is it that we could fail to invent any of the things that we expect to have someday or even soon? Lots of things that we've talked about that we may hope to obtain, we may expect to obtain, but it could be that we don't manage to get there because we're building on the clay feet of analysis. Another kind of failure that we might have is failure to remedy or improve things. For instance, failure to remedy our nuclear reactors so that they become safe, failure to improve plants, failure to improve our own DNA, failure to produce a just society that respects everyone, failure to or if you prefer capitalism or socialism, how one or the other could fail. So this can give an account. Over-reliance of analysis can help you understand how these things could fail to be improved for all our efforts. And also it can tell you how our efforts could fail to scale up. For for instance, our efforts to establish international law or even peace around the world. How our efforts to scale up AI until it becomes a true partner instead of a tool, and a useful partner that isn't trying to take over our lives. Or how is it that, or could science fail to develop further? Right now it's being run in a very bureaucratically managed way with all sorts of interesting, that's something for another episode, but it's being run according to metrics, and every person and every scientific article is measured according to a certain metric, and it's all analyzed and all fed into spreadsheets. And is there some way we could understand how that could fail? Also, our efforts to develop franchises of, say, fast food restaurants or of any other business, how could that fail to produce a healthy food? How could it fail to produce healthy food, or healthy whatever, or useful whatever? How could it be that a worldwide franchise in, say, luggage would actually deliver poorer luggage or poorer shoes than one would get with smaller companies? Or how is it that maybe globalization could possibly fail sooner or later? So in other words, it's possible for us to perform brilliantly at something, some particular thing at first, and it may seem possible for that success. It may even seem absolutely reliable, what we've done so far. At least may seem absolutely reliable to most people. Okay, and then it's possible for that innovation or idea or technique to apparently, without warning, to just run out of gas. So something that worked perfectly before, like specializing education into many different roles, many different schools, many different classes, many different ages, may seem to work well up to a point, and then after a while it may end up giving you people who are unable to think clearly and independently. So what I'm talking about is not just running out of energy, but that most or all of our best practices that we've developed in the last 500 years may fail to deliver additional improvements. So what I'm saying is we may not just run out of the ability to consume more and more resources like energy or minerals, but we may also run out of the ability to get further improvements from the different techniques and ideas that we've developed so far. They may take us to a certain point, roughly where we are today, and just go no further. Or they may have already gone too far. We may have already carried things too far, and that we may be so committed to them that we may not have noticed yet that actually they're a burden on us. So there are certain things that we thought were working well for us, but that may actually be dragging us down, that maybe stopped working well a while ago, and some of those things may have even turned into cancers. Like I just mentioned the one where you divide the extended family again and again and again until nobody has a friend to speak of, a real friend that they can depend on. That's something that's turned in, or a family. That's something where it's clearly turned into a cancer. And there may be others, and we'll need to do some discernment. And part of the purpose of this prepping channel is to encourage you to discern some more about what's actually helping you out, helping your society out, helping your family out, and what's not, and how far you should carry each particular idea, and what's its limit. Like for instance, medicine. At what point do you say, well, maybe I've seen enough doctors for now, I've taken enough medications, maybe I don't want to try one for a while. Maybe I'll just do without that surgery. Maybe I won't take my child. Maybe I won't take my child to that hospital, or maybe I will have only this number of vaccinations and no more. Maybe I'll have my child born at home. Those are examples of where you think, okay, well, how far has this medical system taken us, and which part of this actually was beneficial, and which part of it is a step too far, and I would be better off doing without. So this is all prepping for. In other words, this episode is preparing you for the next episodes, where first we understand how. In the next section, we'll be talking about where we are in society today, where we're actually in a crisis, not just of running out of resources to consume more and more of, but also a crisis of things that we thought were working for us no longer take us a step further. And then in the third section of this channel, we'll be talking about how to prepare to live well in the coming era, and that'll be partly discerning which things from the past, which of the best practices that we've adopted are really useful and continuing to help us, and which are better to do without. So with that, I thank you. If you know of anybody who may be interested in this channel, please invite them, and have a wonderful week. Take care.